Bits and Bricks.
Welcome to Bits and Bricks, a podcast about all things LEGO games. I'm Ethan Vincent.
And I'm Brian Crescenti. Together, we look back at the rich 25-year history of LEGO games, chat with early developers and seasoned studios who have all tackled the creation of video games for one of the most popular and respected toy companies in the world, the LEGO Group. Scorpion-throwing mummy queens, hot dog suit-wearing pirates, intergalactic girls, super wrestlers. LEGO Brawls is a minifigure lover's dream, packed with the sort of mashups that would take a crate of blind bags to recreate.
It also has this crazy mix of settings pulled from a bunch of fan-favorite LEGO themes like Jurassic Park, Pirates, Ninjago, and Blacktron.
And then you kind of put all that together with this sort of king of the hill battle between two online teams, and you're left with a pretty quirky and fun Apple Arcade game.
In this week's episode of Bits and Bricks, we talk with Red Games Co., the Salt Lake City, Utah-based developer behind the minifig brawler LEGO Brawls. I had a chance to visit the studio and get a behind-the-scenes tour of where the game creation and ongoing support happens. I also had a chance to chat with some of the team members about their workspace, how the studio was formed, and their early endeavors in gaming.
I'm so jealous. It sounds like it was a fun place to visit, and
it was.
Who knows, maybe one day I'll get to visit it.
Yes, you will.
Fortunately, I was able to at least chat with Jared Kroff, who's the executive creative director at Red Games, about the game's inception and find out some surprising information about how LEGO Brawls started life as a mobile phone side-scrolling racer, its Nintendo-inspired evolution, and how the game continues to get such robust support. Now let's have a listen. How was it that Red Games somehow got in contact with the LEGO Group and started working with them?
Yeah, so we were in contact with the LEGO Group for several years about different projects, and we have a history of having done some projects that used the LEGO brand in the past. It was many years ago that we did kind of like an interactive website through LucasArts. For one of the LEGO Star Wars console titles, which was technically a marketing website, but it was an interactive kind of multiplayer experience that actually was kind of like a precursor to some of the gameplay for LEGO Brawls. And so we had some interactions with the brand, and we had some contacts there that we met at conferences and stuff like that, and we just kind of talked over the years, and eventually kind of the right opportunity came up where the LEGO Group was reaching out to a small group of studios to kind of pitch creative original ideas for LEGO games. And so we were able to meet with a group of them at the Toy Fair out in New York. And they kind of told us what they were looking for, and that kind of led to the opportunity that became LEGO Brawls.
So that initial meeting or that idea that they were looking for some pitches, did they have any sort of specifications in terms of what sort of games they were looking for people to pitch to them?
So it was actually a really awesome opportunity in the way that they set the whole thing up, that they basically said, you know, if you could build any game, like if there were no restrictions, just use a studio, if you could build any game, tell us what that game would be, and then, you know, we can figure out how it can become a LEGO brand thing. And when you think about it, that's like the most like LEGO Group proposition ever, to basically say, if you could build anything, what would it be? You know?
That's so cool.
And so they kind of put that to us, and it started this process, and they were really smart about the way they set up kind of like the prototyping to kind of prove out the concepts and kind of narrow them down to which concepts would be the most successful. And so we were really appreciative of that kind of rare opportunity to just kind of pitch whatever our dream project would be.
So what was that initial pitch, and what was sort of the core conceit behind it?
Yeah, so we put together a couple of ideas for them, but this one was definitely the front runner. And it kind of started out as not an endless runner, but a side-scrolling competitive runner. So probably the best reference on mobile would be Fun Run, if you're familiar with that game. Yeah. I mean, they're on to like Fun Run 3 now, It's just a huge franchise, It's a really, really successful and kind of like fun game. But we were referencing also kind of like Jetpack Joyride as far as just kind of like one-touch, like simple gameplay, with the idea being that kind of like Jetpack Joyride, how you can get in these different types of contraptions that kind of change your controls a little bit, but also change your abilities. We were like, well, that's perfect because you can just like build anything out of bricks. So maybe I collect some Lego bricks and then I can build a power-up and then that gives me an edge. And the original concept was kind of like a race, kind of like, again, like a side-scroller runner where you're kind of trying to start at the beginning and make it to the end. But we also referenced a title that was on like one of the Nintendo DS Mario games. I remember playing it on the original Nintendo DS, which like at the time was such a great device. And at the time was extremely novel. Me and my partner Adam here at the studio we would be on trips, on a plane ride, and the Nintendo DS had just come out, and we would be playing Mario versus Luigi, which we just literally, it was like a mini game included with like new Super Mario Bros. On the DS, and you just play like normal Mario, but it's like versus each other, and you're trying to collect stars, but you can use your power-ups, your fireballs and superstars and stuff like that to eliminate the other player, and they drop a star, and then you try to pick up their stars, and the first person to 5 stars wins. And we just loved that game. And we were grown adults on the airplane, and sometimes we wouldn't be sitting next to each other. And at the time, like the concept of playing an online game, like definitely didn't exist on an airplane. Yeah. And even the idea of an ad hoc Wi-Fi connecting 2 devices was pretty novel. And so we would just look like these like man children, because we're just like sitting next to strangers and just playing the DS and just like laughing like so hard, because like something really funny would happen in the game. And so that was something that we referenced in our pitch, was we just loved kind of like that you could take these familiar Mario controls and just make a game where it's like, dude, let's just brawl it out, and just battle over something. And it was a ton of fun. And over the course of the development of the project, the concept started to lean more towards the Mario versus Luigi gameplay. And we kind of left the Jetpack Joyride fun run concept behind, which is kind of a natural thing to happen. But it started out as kind of like fun run, and then it turned into Mario versus Luigi over time.
That's cool. So you send them this prototype. What sort of impact does their reaction to that, and I guess over time working with them, what sort of impact do they have on the game's final iteration?
I'd have to say, we work with a lot of awesome brands out there, some of the larger brands in the world, and they're all great. They're all great, but the LEGO Group really brings something unique to the table, and they were really awesome to work with because they really do stand by that vision and that promise to kind of let us build what we think is going to be the most fun, but at the same time providing proper guidance for what would be appropriate for the LEGO brand. So they give us a lot of flexibility, but they also give us a lot of guidance. And what's interesting is that I found that they really just felt like they were just part of the team. And so rather than it being this formal process where we like, okay, like we did all this work and now we're submitting it, and it has to get like approved or denied or like sent back or something like that, they were more just like in step with us. And so that kind of organic conversation we'd have with them, and they'd just be like, I was playing the build, and like, what about this idea? And they would present ideas that would contribute and influence the game. It's kind of interesting how I feel like in the end, it not only made a better product, but it made a better LEGO product and a more authentic product, because there was a real collaboration rather than kind of like just like an approval or rejection, process on certain things. So we would go out and visit them in Denmark. They'd come out and visit us. We'd spend some time. We'd play the game together. We'd kind of like laugh, and they'd throw out ideas. We'd throw out ideas. And just a really amazing group and an awesome experience. I think it lent itself to really good creativity.
It's interesting when we talk on this podcast, we talk to people who work with the LEGO Group or work at the LEGO Group on LEGO video games. There's often this discussion about making something that has sort of LEGO DNA or that fits in with the sort of ideals of the LEGO Group. When you were working on your game, how did you find that sort of sweet spot? And in your mind, what makes it different than making some other brawler that just has a different IP?
It's interesting because, if I go back and I look at literally the original bullet points of what we sent over to them, we made mention of the kind of customizing your brawler as being, part of the meta game. But at that time, it was probably just kind of like, and it's Lego, so you'll collect stuff and customize your character.
Right.
But the minifig became the core of the game. And at some point early in development, we had this idea of, a minifigure is, for the most part, made up of pants, a torso, and a head. And if you only give me those three things to work with, I can click together, a bunch of different pants and torsos and heads, and I can make a unique character. And so we wanted to do something similar with your brawler design, where you would have 3 power-ups that you could choose. So it gives you enough flexibility to build something unique, but not so much that it's overwhelming. It's still as simple as just kind of clicking together a minifig. And so you have a light, medium, and a heavy power-up, and I combine those 3 things to have essentially a gameplay strategy or a play style or just a personality. And as we started to put that together, I feel like that's where the game really kind of found its soul, and found that unique Lego offering. We ended up with kind of a team-based gameplay where we're referencing Overwatch, which is kind of awesome to say, well, let's take what's fun about Overwatch and apply it to this really simple side scroller.
Yeah.
But Overwatch is awesome because you have all these amazing heroes that you can master and learn how to counter them, but then also how to play with them, and every game you might be playing with a different character, and you might have your favorite because of a certain skill or ability or style that they have. And the idea was, well, what if you could take all of the Overwatch characters and pick your favorite abilities and attributes and put them together to make your own hero? And that was something that we thought was really Lego. And so we combined that with not only just customizing the way your minifig looked, but thinking they're not just a minifigure, they're a brawler. They're a Lego brawler. And so what's their personality? What do they look like? But then what's their style? What do they play like? What are their power-ups like? What are their abilities? And what's their play style? And let players, collect as much stuff as they can and come up with something that's truly them and truly unique. And I think it's been a strength of the game.
Yeah. How long did you end up working on this? What was the development time for the game?
So again, we built that prototype, we worked on it for just 6 weeks, and which was an awesome first step to take. And then we probably started development that fall. So fall of 2018. And then it launched as an arcade title in September of 2019. And we worked on it that entire time. So kind of core dev to launch was about a year, more or less, which is, I don't know, in a way fast and in a way slow for us at the same time. But we've really never stopped development, on Brawls. It's launch was kind of just the beginning, and it's been pretty steady development since.
I'm curious about Apple Arcade. It was, I think, either a launch title or very close to a launch title. How did Apple Arcade become sort of a platform for this game? And once you knew it was going to be an Apple Arcade title, did that have any sort of impact on the game's design and your plans for ongoing support?
Yeah. So we obviously had started discussion with the LEGO group before Apple Arcade was announced. And so we had the idea for the game. We knew we were going to build the game. And when the arcade showed up as an option for the title, it really was just kind of the perfect home. It felt right because we were already leaning into this idea of a same space multiplayer competitive game like Smash Bros, but on mobile where we're all holding our own device. And then with Apple Arcade, it added the ability to play on your Mac and also play on Apple TV, so we're even better. And we just felt like we just found the perfect home because we were already trying to create an experience that leveraged essentially the Apple platform for a really unique gameplay offering that was console-like, but in that console that you already have in your pocket that you don't really think about. And multiplayer was just a really, really big part of it. But it did definitely influence, I think, the design because it allowed us to lean even more in that direction into kind of a family-friendly multiplayer experience.
Right.
Where the metagame didn't have to become maybe what it would have had to become had it been a free-to-play experience. sometimes free to play is thought of as kind of like a dirty word, or it's like, it's like got all these like things, all these like in-app purchases and all these like grinding mechanics and things like that, and that we kind of say is ruining video games, I guess. Some people say that. But at the same time, players really have become accustomed to these types of metagames and kind of expect this type of like unlock system, and for there just to be this endless trail of things to unlock. And especially kids today, just like the way that they play games, it's just like the way they see the world, is through, I got to level up my character and I got to like collect all these different things. And it's kind of like what we expect in video games.
Right.
And so we still ended up with a metagame that is like that, but it's one that is hopefully feels rewarding and positive to players, and maybe not quite as burdensome. And certainly, we were really behind what Apple was doing with the platform, which is kind of providing parents with a space that they can feel safe, sending their kids there, knowing that there's no ads in the game, that there's no, they're not gonna like meet some stranger in the game. Right. It's a game that's not only safe, but it's quality. Yeah. And so that it's like that soul is what really kind of like lined up with our values already as a studio, and particularly, partnering, I think it lines up with the LEGO Group's values as a brand. And so all those things kind of just like came together to just help Brawls focus, I think, in the right place.
All right, so I wanna pause here in my live interview.
Yes.
And break the fourth wall, so that we could talk very quickly about the fantastic minifig creation process in Brawls.
It's so great.
It is. So basically, you can go in and you can choose a bunch of different elements. You could switch up headgear, the head, the body, the torso.
Yeah.
And you have to unlock all this stuff. And you can end up with crazy creations. Like I have one that I'm looking at right now where he has cat legs. He's wearing a slip, it sort of looks like. He's got a baguette for a weapon. He's got a French mustache, and of course is wearing bunny ears.
Perfect.
And so, you just go in and you create your own mashups. They're a lot of fun to do. You can also create their special abilities, and you go through and choose what those look like.
Yep.
And then finally, when you've done all of that, you then get to create the name of your character.
Yes.
And so the way this works is you have two different spots, two different sets of words, and they're essentially randomized, and you just decide which two you want to use by choosing arrows. So let's do this. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going through the first one right now. I'm tapping to the right to have it switch through names. You tell me when to stop.
Okay. Stop.
Okay, excellent. And then not just the fact that you told me to stop, but also that's the first word. Excellent. Okay, and now we're going to go with the second one. What's the second one? Tell me when to stop.
Okay. And stop.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. Excellent ballerina.
It is so great.
It works because, he's got the slip on and, the bunny ears. That doesn't make any sense, but he's cool. I like him.
And maybe if you're really like incredible at Brawler, it will be one of those, names where it's like, oh, I can beat this character. Like, actually, you can't. If you get really good.
It's excellent ballerina. My favorite among all of my characters is the golden kitten.
Yeah.
And you've got to watch out for him.
Great character, for sure.
So let's get back to the interview. We will unpause Jared, who's staying right now in stasis, and we'll get right back into the interview. It's amazing. I played the game when it first came out, and I got so into it that I actually went to the Lego store in my nearby mall and went to that little kiosk of minifigure parts and spent definitely way too long trying to build my minifigure from the game.
Yeah, that's great.
To the point that I think there were several people who worked there who were kind of hovering around saying, "Can we help you with something?" Was that something you expected to see happen? And have you heard of people doing that, like wanting to sort of find the real life version of their minifigure that they play in the game?
Yeah, that's actually really awesome. What it reminds me of is something that's obviously just totally unique to working on a Lego title. You're kicking off a game. A normal process for us would be, you're going to build a power up, so let's draw like a concept sketch, and then once that concept art looks good, then we'll go into some geometry and some texturing. Kind of like goes through this like natural process of from an idea to an asset that's a playable thing that's actually in the game. Well, what's crazy unique about working on something Lego is that it's like, well, all of the stuff has to be to scale, built out of real bricks. So all of a sudden, my colleague who's normally drawing a concept sketch is downloading, Stud.io, and he's actually building his concepts out of bricks, which is like awesome. Like no one complained about this.
Right.
They're all having a great time. And we just had so much fun. It was a little daunting because you don't kind of become a master builder, so to speak, overnight. And we're going to have to submit these builds to the Lego group for review. But just the creativity that came out of it was amazing. And I think a highlight for me was I went to one of our artists named Ron. He's been working at our studio for a long time. He's an amazing illustrator and animator, and not too bad with some bricks, as it would turn out. And I go to Ron and I'm like, I have this idea. We have power-ups where, it's kind of just like something that shoots projectiles, something that you hold, and then we have vehicles that you drive. But I need something in between. I'm like, I want something that it's kind of like a backpack that you wear, and it still shoots projectiles, but it provides some sort of armor to the minifig, So it's like you still run and jump like a normal character, but you're clearly wearing this backpack, which it's like in between a gun, for a lack of a better word, and a vehicle. And Ron comes back in a couple hours and he's built this hot dog stand that's in the game that has, it doesn't make any sense. Like I would love it if I saw a vendor doing this. I would definitely buy a hot dog, but he's got kind of like the grill attached to the back and then like this little canopy thing with like a little hot dog brick on top. And then it would shoot ketchup and mustard as its projectile.
Yeah.
And that was not prompted at all. Like I didn't tell him I need a hot dog themed thing. I told him I need something that would provide armor to a minifig.
Of course, your brain goes to hot dog when you hear armor. That's
yeah, exactly. So he comes back with that, and it's just like I sent it over to some of our partners at the Lego group, and they just loved it right away. And again, I think that kind of speaks to how when the Lego group kind of like really stands by their own values and lets us just take the bricks and find the fun, you end up with something that you never could have planned out on paper. But, okay, so I got a little sidetracked there. But at the time that we were building those, started to make those builds when our friends from the Lego group would fly out to Salt Lake City and visit us. They would bring us the builds, because like it would be hard for us to find all the exact bricks, because like in Stud.io you can just grab like any brick that exists.
Oh, right.
But they would do the work, and I just like love the idea that they're over there in Denmark like building, our power ups, out of bricks.
Right.
And they would bring it and they'd come and set them on the table, and we'd look at them and be like, look, like that's our game right there.
That's so cool.
And so it's definitely something that we talked about that we're like, how cool is that people could get a favorite power up and create a brawler that they're really proud of. And that technically it's a little bit tricky because you got to find all those bricks, but they could actually build that out of bricks. And so we try to make sure that all of our power-up builds are viable. And when we send some of the builds over to the Lego group, it's awesome when they kind of come back and they'll be like, hey, we have some feedback on this like snake car. If you add like a piece like this, it will improve like the structural integrity of the car. Something
That is so cool.
Like obviously doesn't matter for like the video game. It's like, yeah, it's like whatever, but like we want it to be authentic. We want it to be real.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to make any promises. Some of our builds might be a little bit brittle if you actually do them out there, but it is something that we're really proud of. So I like that story that you did that, and it is something that we thought about, and we would love to add a feature at some point where as I'm browsing all of the power-ups in the game, I could view build instructions and set lists, pieces lists, and maybe print those out and build them for myself.
I think it's a really neat idea. And hopefully, maybe that's something you guys can do. What I like is, I played this a lot, stopped playing it for a while. Recently, I went back to go play it some more, and I noticed that LEGO Brawls is all over the place on the Apple Arcade page and on iOS. Like, it gets a lot of promotion. Like, what do you think is driving that? And I'm curious, how well is the game doing? It strikes me that it must be doing really well to get that much promotion.
It's done really well on the arcade. While we don't have kind of like exact, stats of, how we rank against the other titles, we've been in that kind of like they have like a top games on the arcade like list that you can always see on the arcade page. And Brawls has never not been in that list, in the almost 2 years or I guess year and a half since launch. And so we're really proud of that, So we think that we're always in that kind of like top 10 percentile of titles on there, and it's done really well. And so I think that we just kind of ended up with something that strikes the right chords, I think, for the arcade audience, lines up with what Apple's looking for and what Lego's looking for, and it's just been a great tentpole title for the platform.
So I noticed one of the other things I couldn't help but notice is the massive sort of robust support that you all have been giving the game. You're tapping into things like Hidden Side and Jurassic World. What is sort of the process that happens when you're trying to decide how to continue to support the game? And, I'm just curious, what is it that you're hoping to achieve with this sort of robust support?
Yeah. I think it's maybe one of the differentiators for us on the arcade. If you look at some of the other titles, they tend to be kind of like stories that kind of begin and end, and you kind of play through them one time, maybe two times, but then it's kind of cool, great, there's 200 other titles, on the platform. So it's like time for me to move on, where our model is a little bit, I think, more traditional console model, where we're trying to build an evergreen title like Smash Bros. We knew the title had a lot of potential, and we were really happy when we found the right home for it on the arcade. But it's really just been something where after launch, we just kind of look at the game, look how it's doing, and then say, okay, well, how can we make this better? Which is also a very LEGO Group mentality. I believe their motto is even the best isn't good enough, or something like that.
Only the best.
Only the best. Yeah, it depends on how you interpret it. But only the best is good enough, which means it's like even when you achieve the best, there's always a better best. It's like how can we like make it even better? And so it was successful at launch. We did make some important changes at the beginning. We launched with only 3 levels, which was really, minimum viable in my opinion. So we always knew that we wanted to add more. But it's just something that's organic, that as we get feedback from fans, as we watch how the game's performing, as we play the game ourselves, we talk with our partners at the LEGO Group, we just kind of say, what would make this even better? And we just kind of head in that direction. And it's ended up being a cadence where we try to have a meaningful update every month or so. The depth of the game that we have for a new player who's just discovering Brawls for the first time, they kind of like jump in, like, wow, like look at all this great stuff. There's all these different levels, and Jurassic World, like, love that. Different like cycling seasons and things for them to unlock. And so that's really kind of like our goal, is that just like the more that we expand the game, the deeper the experience becomes, and new fans of Brawls are even better off than the people who caught the game at launch.
So the Ninjago update looks like it is a little more robust than previous updates. It has things like solid gold versions of Ninjago Heroes, and you've got a new level and emotes, and it all seems to be tied to the 10-year anniversary of Ninjago. Can you walk me through how that update came about, and how was it designed?
Yeah. So we had started a process where when the game launched, we didn't have the concept of seasons. And so what we were doing is we were going back through all of our existing levels that we had built at that point and kind of creating season content to match that level. We find a bunch of castle content, and we build a season of things for people to unlock. And we knew that Ninjago would be big even without the anniversary. It's just such a huge brand within the LEGO toys. And it just so happened that we'd been saving Ninjago because it's awesome, that when it kind of came time to lock down on that particular level, that our friends at the LEGO Group, were releasing all these 10-year anniversary toys. And they started to show us some of these toys, which are just like blown away with the gold minifigs is kind of just like all you got to say,
Right.
It's like the ultimate, a very Nintendo style kind of unlock. And that's something that we want to do more of in Brawls, and we were excited to start with Ninjago. It's awesome that the toys on shelves and what's coming out in the game are the same thing. A kid can be playing Brawls this month and be like, I just unlocked the minifig that came in the set that I just got for my birthday or whatever, and it's like the same thing. And we wanted that Smash Bros style batch of content where it's the mashup of everything. It's almost the history of LEGO in a game where you can build anything and just go brawl. And so you have the old IP, and then not only the newer IP like Ninjago, but also the Ninjago content that just hit shelves this month, and it makes it something that's both historic but also very current. We're hoping to do more of that in the future.
So I'm curious with Jurassic World, I was actually really surprised to see that in the game, just because I know, there has to be multiple IP rights that you have to juggle. But the second thought I had was, man, wouldn't it be great if you added things like, Lego Star Wars or Lego Marvel or Lego Indiana Jones? So I'm just curious, is that something you're starting to look at? And how likely is something like that to come, to having it come to Brawls?
Yeah, we were super excited to do that deal with Universal, another great group over there. And Jurassic World ended up being like the perfect fit, right? Like the when you take control of the T-Rex on the Jurassic World level, it's kind of like one of the most iconic moments, in Brawls. And you can even run that T-Rex into a bathroom. If you remember when the lawyer gets like eaten, the T-Rex smashes. We tried to like recreate that moment. That's so fun. That's so cool to kind of appeal again to Jurassic Park is another one of those brands that it's like it appeals to the parents and it appeals to the kids because of the new films that have come out. And so you're kind of like bridging these generational gaps. Some of those brands that you mentioned might be a little bit more difficult to implement than others. But we feel really confident that the brands that we're able to get in will be, rewarding and hopefully surprising maybe to fans in a way, but that also, if it just so happens that you're a true fan of that IP, that you can be like, that's a cool way that they fit that in, the way the power-ups work, the way the level looks and things like that. It feels Jurassic World, but it also feels Lego, and then hopefully it also feels Brawls, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. So Builder's Journey is another Lego video game that came to Apple Arcade and has been very successful. But they recently announced that they are now going to be making the leap to other platforms. And boy, would I love to play Brawls on something like the Switch. I'm just curious, is that something you're looking at, or what are the plans for perhaps going beyond Apple Arcade?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting time to be working in video games. Really wasn't too many years ago where there was this strong division between, mobile games were almost kind of not even considered real games, and then you had console was like, that's the real deal, and PC, of course, and the whole VR thing we won't talk about. But everything's moving in a direction now where titles are platform agnostic. Right. You'll just see a lot of the big brands going in that direction where you don't think about it like that anymore of like, oh, is that a mobile game or a console game? It's just an awesome game, and it's on every platform where it makes sense. And so we're really excited about that. Builder's Journey isn't the first arcade title to be available on multiple platforms, and I think that speaks to the quality of games that are on the arcade platform, that they can live on console as well as on the arcade. We'll be excited to see what happens with Brawls, but I think that there'll definitely be some exciting news real soon.
So Ethan, you were in the area doing some documentary work and visiting family when we decided to dig into this week's topic.
Yeah, it's really cool how the stars aligned on this.
Yeah.
I was in Salt Lake City with a production company, working on a documentary series, and my parents live about an hour away. So it was really convenient and nice to, combine the two. And as you and I were putting the episode together, of course, I knew Red Games was based in Salt Lake City.
Right.
So I reached out to them, and even more surprising was the fact that an acquaintance of mine, Jenny Ray Reynolds, turned out to be one of the producers working on LEGO Brawls.
Oh, right.
But I'll tell you what, Brian, to actually go and do a field recording on site for Bits and Bricks was just so refreshing. Of course, taking all the right COVID precautions, making sure we had masks on, social distancing, all that stuff. But yeah, it was just fun to be in this kind of live environment on tour. And so here's me on tour at Red Games Co. in downtown Salt Lake City. Hey, Jenna Ray.
Hey.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
It's been a long time, so
I'm
glad that we get to meet up here in this really cool space.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. So this is Red Games Co.
Yes.
Our offices. It's a big kind of open area, little industrial.
Yeah, like a big loft.
You got some exposed kind of concrete pillars and stuff. Very cool.
The first thing you see when you come in is, well, I would say first you see that Champion Street Fighter II edition,
right?
Old arcade style.
Yeah, old arcade cabinet and a ping pong table, which is, I think, a staple of all games companies. I don't know.
That's right. Yes, you have to start with that. And then the first thing you see is like a nice little Lego model, and then you come over here and see sets.
Correct, yes. So we do have a lot of Lego sets around the office because, we think it's important for the people working on the game to be immersed in the sets and how the bricks look and how the minifigs look and sort of how things all fit together, right? Because our artists basically create bricked exact versions of builds for the game.
I'm sure the Lego group wouldn't want it any other way, right? It needs to be...
Correct. It has to be authentic. There's a thing that's like, if that's not how the brick works or how it looks, like it can't be that way in the game. They have to hold swords and shields and melee weapons like the way that an actual minifig would hold those things.
That's awesome.
And then we actually over here have like a whole Ninjago city set up with like all these lights and things. These little lantern pieces with the strand and these banners. We actually used these pieces in the Ninjago 10-year anniversary when we redid the level. Our artists took these little banners and then put the gold Ninjago 10-year emblem on those white flags. So, we have digital versions of a lot of these sets, and we kind of will pull little pieces for just decorating. We take a lot of inspiration from the actual sets. So, yeah.
So cool.
Fun.
And then you've got this cool conference room area, which has the typical huge whiteboard wall with all the secrets I'm not supposed to know.
Yeah, so this is our conference room where a lot of brainstorming happens. The entire wall is a whiteboard. The whole table is a whiteboard. Everything in here is a whiteboard, pretty much.
And I look at this wall, and you've got Ninjago Prime. You've got all kinds of different things. I'm not going to call them all out, but it's really exciting to see. You've got minifigures and all the accessories that go with it. It's pretty cool, and I'm assuming these are remnants of past releases and milestones that were done. So I'm the second producer on Brawls. There was a producer, she still works here, named Tasha, who was the original producer that worked on Brawls through development and launch, and then post-launch. So this is just sort of them planning out different features for the game. So there is a single player progression in the game currently, where players can basically master these champion characters, and they have, their own loadouts and their own special emotes and weapons. So you can mix and match and customize your characters to play, or you can just play as Super Wrestler or as the Heroic Knight or as Intergalactic Girl. So this is where they were planning out some of those champion archetypes for the first launch of the game. The other thing that is very nice to see, and the Lego group has this too whenever you go into a conference room, is this.
Yeah.
Tons of Lego bricks.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, we have those all around, and there's actually a couple over there too.
So this is nice too. You've got the release and a calendar, which of course is very game development, and I could just see the product management, writing these all down, and you can see the developers sitting here going oh man.
Getting mad at you for putting too much stuff in 1 week. Yeah, that's how it goes.
And nothing's more awesome than putting the lock sign next to a date, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yeah, so this is our next release sprint that we're going to be planning.
It's funny because I came at a day where it's kind of convenient for me to be here, not convenient because there's so much going on, right? It's game development.
It really doesn't stop. There's always something. Even if you're pre-launch, right, and you have the more traditional product release cycle of alpha, beta, vertical slice, all of that stuff, you still are constantly having to deliver on those milestones. But it gets even more chaotic when you're in a game that's live and people are playing and you're constantly having to update content for players. There's always bugs.
Yeah. Well, it's also one of those things where it's you develop, and you're always developing, thinking okay, we'll be good, we'll deliver, that'll be done. Mm-hmm. Then we'll take a little time and breathe.
No, there's no breathing time. What are you talking about?
I know. It's so brutal. And yet when it's all working, it's very satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, like basically by the time we are submitting a release, which actually today is a submission day, so we have a submission that we have to get out. You're like, all right, so we submitted that. That'll go live in 3 weeks, and but like we're like well into the next thing by the time it goes live. And you know, sometimes you kind of keep tabs on like Twitter or Discord or like where players are talking and interacting just to kind of see how they're reacting, right? Like we have data that we look at. But yeah, there's not a lot of time to be like, that was a great release, you know, and like congratulate ourselves. We're just like, all right, what's the next thing? And you're immediately like off on the next thing, so.
Look at all these minifigs.
Most of these are from the minifig series.
Yeah.
Which was a huge win for the game that we were able to use the minifig series because it added so many characters and pieces and so much more customizability. Is that a word? Yeah.
I think so. And we had a whole episode with Tara Wyke on minifigs, and it was fascinating.
I know. It was funny. When I was listening to that, she was talking about, she's like, there's a couple games that are coming out that like were really celebrations of the minifigs, and I was like, please say Brawls, please say Brawls. And then you guys were like, Brawls? And she was like, that's the one. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah. I remember that. That. I think that was Brian who's like asking about that. That was great.
Yeah. So like some of these, you know, like if players were here looking at this, they would recognize these from the game. Like we have the classic king and the classic queen minifig, and they're actually the mascots of our castle level. So you play for team queen or team king.
That's right.
You know, this the mummy queen here is one of our champions. Corn cob guy was released in a recent minifig of the week.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that guy.
For Western season. So yeah, like these are all recognizable things that you can collect and customize in the game, which is fun.
It's very cool. It's cool to see them all in minifig format. And it does remind you again that the game is based on Lego minifigs and Lego experience, you know, Lego DNA. It's all over the place. And then you see them here and you've got your Lego bricks.
The best sound.
Well, cool. Thanks for the tour. This was really fun.
Thing.
And what a cool space and just a cool vibe. And yes, I imagine when it's popping with employees and people, when it's in normal operation, it's going to be, we'll have to quiet them down. Psh, guys.
Hey, whoa, we're recording
a
podcast over here.
So here we are.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for that little tour.
Yeah, thank you.
So Brian, after my tour with Jenna Ray, I had a chance to also meet with Jared Kroff, the executive creative director.
Yeah.
This time in person, which was, such a nice diversion from our usual remote sessions. And Jared also walked me a little bit through Red Games Co. and kind of tucked away in the corner, there's this one-to-one replica of the motto of the LEGO Group, only the best is good enough. And it was actually made by one of the creative directors there, Adam, out of wood, and it was done really well and impressive. And Jared said that it was something that the LEGO Group also really responded to when they came and visited the studio.
Right.
But it was just so great to sit down with Jared in his office and also talk, face to face to ask a few more additional questions about the history of Red Games and how their studio evolved. What sort of games does Red Games focus on? Mm-hmm. If you had to explain the kind of games you work on, what would you say about the Red Games kind of library, and what do you guys focus on?
So early on, the emphasis was on innovative uses of technology or unexpected uses of technology. And so the first app that we made was called Pet Peeves Monsters, and it was a pet growing app. But the original idea was that you could only battle someone who you could actually see in the real world. It started out with this thing where it's like we would actually hold our phones up to each other and it would use the camera to recognize the peeve, and it's almost like the Japanese, the beta fish, when they see each other they kind of freak out, that was the idea, that that's why they're called pet peeves, is because when they see each other they get all riled up into this battle mode. And it ended up turning into this tabletop thing where you would play, if four of us all had pet peeves, we would put our devices, I don't know where this idea came from, we would put our 4 devices on the table next to each other and it would form one kind of Jumbotron screen. And then they would kind of like run across, like my P would end up on your screen, but the battle might like spill back over onto my screen. And it's kind of this like really just like weird idea, but we loved the social aspect of it, that we could be sitting around a table at lunch and we're using these devices that we have in our pockets already, but in like this weird way that we never thought of before. And we really love that idea. And so when you start to see things like Pokemon Go and stuff that took augmented reality and geolocation, things that existed and people were familiar with, but you put them together in a way that's interesting, and suddenly you have something that feels really novel and exciting. And it feels kind of like magical to people, that they're like, like how does this work? And I don't really know, but it's just fun. So that's been a big part of it, and that's still a big part of what we do. We're always looking for that fun little twist.
What do you think makes a game a Red Games game? Like, it takes a while to develop a voice, I think, as a gaming studio, and to like identify like, wait, what do we do? Who are we? How do our things look? After you get through like what our logo should look like and geek all out about that, there's kind of a point where you have to go like, no, seriously, like, what's your voice? Who are you?
Right. It's interesting. I think a lot of it has to do with actually having smaller teams. We end up where games have a little bit more of a handcrafted kind of feel, where every team member was so passionate and invested in that project and in the product as a whole, that it just kind of shows in all of the details, from the UX and the UI and the game screens down to the core gameplay itself. You just kind of like see that love that went into making the product. Where sometimes when things scale really large and you have really talented people but only focusing on this micro section of the game, it's harder for all of those things to line up. And obviously some large studios do it very well, and you have these Fortnite type situations where who knows why it kind of came out so great, but it resonates. But I think that handcrafted kind of fine attention to detail and really fun kind of like characters, I think that's a Red game. And then I also think lighthearted is a big part of it. We tend to do really well with kind of like 9 to 11-year-old demographics, because like they want something cool, they want something competitive, but like they still just like to laugh, and like if it's funny and you kind of like check all those boxes, then you have a hit. And that's something that we kind of enjoy too. We're kind of old kids, I guess, in some ways.
That's good. That leads right into my question about your relationship with the LEGO Group. Obviously, that target demographic of like 10 to 11-year-old kids is a special age, I think, also for the LEGO Group, because you're coming out of maybe all your experiences building with Lego sets as a kid, but you're also maybe right before that dark age cutoff that's going to happen when you turn teenager and start doing other things, And so you've got this unique thing where you have a maturity in a kid who enjoys and appreciates and might recognize that humor, but also just such a cool age, adventurous, exploratory, willing to do everything, full of energy, want to just play kind of thing. Talk to me a little bit about that relationship with the LEGO Group, how that started, and maybe how that was a good fit, perfect fit in kind of where you were and where you wanted to go,
Yeah, it really is. It really is kind of a perfect fit. I don't know, I might botch this, but there's a quote from George Lucas where someone asked him like who he thinks the target audience for Star Wars is, and he says it's for kids or like young teenagers. Basically, it's similar to what you were just saying, that it's like they're on the verge of basically deciding if they're going to be a good person or a bad person. Like that's kind of what Star Wars is about. It's like, hey, you got a choice, man. Like you can go down whichever path you want. And I think that we play in a space kind of just before that. It's like, all right, they're going to have to make this big decision, but they're still kind of out there and just discovering stuff and having fun and laughing and having a good time. So I think it's kind of interesting what you're saying. I think that LEGO kind of plays there as well. We talked to the awesome people at the LEGO Group a lot about the history of their product and how they integrated conflict and things like that, in kind of like the right way. And it can be a fine line. And we really believe in that because we want our games to be family friendly, but we also want them to be competitive. And sometimes that takes the form of combat in a video game, but you can keep that within a space that doesn't have to be overtly, violent or have, no respect for human life and things like that. You can still tell a fun story that has conflict. And if you look at, the Lego films and the products and the way that they take sometimes maybe films that are a little bit more dark, but they get them into their product and they still embrace it and make a true version of that film, but that plays safe and is maybe more appropriate for that younger age. Something that I just really, really respect about their group, and it really lined up with the types of stories that we wanted to tell as well.
So Ethan, as an excuse, I re-downloaded LEGO Brawls, which I loved when it launched, but I hadn't played it for a while.
Yeah.
And thought to myself, I'm gonna just go in and see what it looks like. Play a match or two. Like 2 hours later, I'm like, I've got to go write my script.
2 hours later.
Exactly. Yes.
That's hilarious. Yeah, no, and everything that I heard there and just all the excitement and some of the things I didn't know, I'm super excited to jump into the game. So I would also encourage anyone to take a little gander in LEGO Brawls because, once you start, you cannot stop, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to play with friends and sort of just run around and be a LEGO minifig hooligan.
Bits and Bricks is made possible by LEGO Games. Your hosts are Ethan Vincent and Brian Crescente. Producing by Dave Tech. Our executive producer is Ronnie Scherer. Creative direction and editing by Ethan Vincent. Writing by Brian Crescente. Mixing and sound design by Dan Carlisle. Music by Peter Premer. We'd like to thank our participants, Jared Kroff and Jenna Ray Reynolds. We'd also like to thank the entire LEGO Games team for their support. For questions or comments, write us at bitsandbricks@lego.com. That's bits, the letter N, then bricks@lego.com. And as always, stay tuned for more episodes of Bits and Bricks.